Hello, this is a lecture on the digestive system. This lecture is based on Martini's chapter 25. Here are the drawing assignments, and let's begin. The digestive system overview. Overall, the digestive system is a muscular tube. Its wall has four major layers from the lumen outward: the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscular layer, and the serosa. There are variations that depend on the function of the part of the digestive system. The digestive system consists of the oral cavity, the oropharynx and laryngopharynx, the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and anus, and accessory organs, salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and exocrine pancreas. The digestive system has two major functions: digestion and absorption. Digestion is the enzymatic and chemical breakdown of food into small molecules. Absorption is taking up nutrients into blood or lymph. I think that it's a quite important thing to learn that the digestive system has two major functions: digestion and absorption. Okay, so the digestive system layers: the mucosa and submucosa. The mucosa, or mucosal membrane, consists of an epithelium and an underlying connective tissue, lamina propria. The oral cavity, pharynx, and esophagus, and actually the anus, have non-keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium to protect them from abrasions. The stomach, small intestine, and large intestine have simple columnar epithelium for digestion, secretion, and absorption. And below we have a picture of non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium in the esophagus, which I hope is familiar, and also a picture of the small intestine with simple columnar epithelium with microvilli, which I hope is familiar. Goblet cells and mucus glands are located in the mucosa and submucosa. They secrete mucus onto the surface of the epithelium of the digestive tract. And this little histology picture shows a goblet cell, and this cartoon over here shows a submucosal gland with a duct that reaches to the surface of the epithelium. Okay, the muscularis mucosa is a narrow band of smooth muscle under the mucosa. It has an internal circular layer and an external longitudinal layer, although it is quite a thin layer of muscle, so neither of these layers are very thick. Both the internal and external layers are thin. The muscularis mucosae moves the mucosa and changes the size of the digestive tract lumen. And here's a nice big histology picture that's showing you mucosa, which would be epithelium with underlying lamina propria, and then the muscularis mucosa right underneath it. You can refer back to this. Next, the submucosa is deep to the mucosa. It contains mucus glands, large blood and lymphatic vessels, and areolar connective tissue. A neural plexus, the submucosal plexus, is superficial to the submucosa. When I say that it's superficial to the submucosa, I'm talking about going from the outer wall of the digestive tract to the inner wall. If I'm going from the lumen to the mucosa, to the submucosa, I should say that the submucosal plexus is deep to the mucosa. So I will say that, just as long as you keep straight where it is. The submucosal plexus contains autonomic nervous system axons that innervate the mucosa and submucosa. Okay, the next layer, the muscular layer. The muscular layer, or muscularis externa, is found under the submucosa. It's composed of smooth muscle cells. It has an internal circular and external longitudinal layer. So its two layers are similar to the muscularis mucosae muscle layers, where it was also that there was an internal circular and external longitudinal layer. Now, depending on the way that the specimen is cut, The inner circular layer and external longitudinal layer may look different. So if the specimen is cut longitudinally, as in the histology picture on the left below, then the inner circular muscle appears as though it is sort of choppy, little muscle fiber groups, and the external longitudinal layer looks like long smooth muscle cells. In the histology picture on the right, this is a cross section, and now the internal circular layer looks like the smooth muscle cells are being seen along their length, whereas the external longitudinal layers look as though they were cut in cross section. So just take a moment to look at that and notice how the internal circular layer and the external longitudinal layers look different in the picture on the left and the right. And that is because the one on the left was cut longitudinally. Let's write that down, longitudinal section. Whereas the histology slide on the right was cut in cross section, just so that's clear. The muscular layer is active in peristalsis and segmentation, two forms of movement in the digestive tract. The circular layer forms valves or sphincters in some areas. The valves prevent movement of the contents of the lumen backwards and or forwards. And you can choose which word you like better, sphincters or valves. I think that we learned about arrangements of muscles and we learned sphincter, but in the digestive system, they sometimes call a sphincter a valve. A second neural plexus, the mesenteric neural plexus, is located between the internal and external muscular layers. The mesenteric neural plexus contains autonomic nervous system axons that innervate the muscular layer. The parasympathetic nervous system sends motor commands for smooth muscle contractions, and the sympathetic nervous system sends motor commands for smooth muscle relaxation. The muscularis mucosae of the mucosa and the muscular layer deep to the submucosa are smooth muscle. Smooth muscle contracts as strongly as skeletal and cardiac muscle. In cases of gastroenteritis, the smooth muscle of the digestive tract may contract very strongly and painfully, and this may result in vomiting and diarrhea. Smooth muscle cells are connected by gap junctions. Electrical impulses spread between the cells and travel throughout the smooth muscle. Smooth muscle contractions are involuntary. Pace setter cells, specialized muscle cells, are found in the muscularis mucosae and muscular layer. They undergo spontaneous depolarization. Some smooth muscle cells are connected only to pace setter cells. Many smooth muscle cells are stimulated both by pace setter cells and the autonomic nervous system. Okay, digestive system movements. Peristalsis and segmentation are two patterns of movement produced by smooth muscle cell contractions. They are controlled by the enteric nervous system, which is complicated and, as we just learned, combines pace setter cells and autonomic nervous system input. Peristalsis is a series of muscular movements that move a bolus or small mass of food from the pharynx to the rectum. The circular muscle contracts behind a bolus. That prevents the bolus from going backwards. The circular muscle in front of the bolus relaxes. The longitudinal muscle contracts, shortening the tract. And then a wave of circular muscle contractions moves the bolus forward. And the last contraction of the circular muscle, you can imagine going back to the panel that says circular muscle contracts behind bolus. And starting again, a wave of peristalsis continues for a long ways along the digestive tract. So this would be occurring kind of in a sequential and coordinated way to move a bolus along the part of the digestive tract, whatever that part was. Segmentation mostly relies on contractions of the circular muscle layer. It occurs in most of the small intestine and some of the large intestine. It breaks up and churns the contents of the lumen. It helps mix intestinal secretions and the contents together. It does not move the contents of the lumen forwards, sort of stirs it up where it is. Okay, serosa or visceral peritoneum and parietal peritoneum. The serosa or the visceral peritoneum is the outermost layer of the digestive system. It is a serous membrane with a simple squamous epithelium, which can be also called the mesothelium, and an underlying connective tissue layer with gland cells and glands. The serosa, or visceral peritoneum, covers the digestive system organs. The parietal peritoneum lines the walls of the peritoneal cavity. Peritoneal fluid lies between the visceral and parietal peritoneum, preventing friction as the internal organs function, peristalsis, move. Things are alive in there, they're moving. The peritoneal fluid is primarily formed by transudation, which is movement of the water in plasma through the walls of capillaries that lie under the mesothelium and from there into the peritoneal cavity. The pharynx, esophagus, and rectum are surrounded by an adventitia, a dense connective tissue sheath rather than a serosa. The adventitia attaches them to adjacent structures. Here's a summary slide showing the general organization of the gastrointestinal tract or the digestive tract. And this is a great summary slide showing us that the mucosa has the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. The submucosa has the submucosal plexus. It helps to not use Meissner because that's an eponym, but instead use submucosal plexus. The muscularis propria, or the muscular layer, which has the circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle, and then the serosa or adventitia on the outside. Okay, intraperitoneal versus retroperitoneal organs and mesenteries. So many abdominal organs are within the peritoneal cavity or intraperitoneal. Intraperitoneal organs are surrounded completely by visceral peritoneum. Other abdominal organs are posterior to the peritoneal cavity or retroperitoneal. Retroperitoneal organs are covered by parietal peritoneum only on their anterior surface. The stomach, most of the small intestines, the transverse and sigmoid colon, the liver and spleen are intraperitoneal. The aorta and inferior vena cava, kidneys and ureters, duodenum, pancreas, ascending and descending colon, and rectum are retroperitoneal. Mesenteries are two sheets of peritoneum fused back to back. The two lamina proprias are joined under the two epithelium. Mesenteries loosely suspend abdominal organs from the walls of the abdominal cavity. They stabilize the position of the organs and provide a route for the passage of blood and lymphatic vessels and nerves to and from the organs. The mesentery proper suspends the small intestine. The transverse mesocolon suspends the transverse colon, and the sigmoid mesocolon suspends the sigmoid colon. And you can look at these pictures and see the many examples that I have given to help you understand the mesenteries and their location. In the central panel, we're seeing the mesentery proper and a loop of small bowel hanging from it. We're seeing the transverse mesocolon because that's the transverse colon just under the stomach in this sagittal section here. And then there's the sigmoid colon because this is the sigmoid colon. And I'll just have to take their word for that because I couldn't have told it apart from the small intestines necessarily, although it has a different mesentery coming off the wall. So I guess that should have been my clue. And now it can be yours. Okay, the lesser omentum is a mesentery that connects the liver and the stomach. The greater omentum is a mesentery that connects the stomach and transverse colon. Omentums are called omentums instead of just plain mesenteries because they connect two organs rather than being a mesentery that suspends an organ from the wall of the peritoneal cavity. So the lesser omentum, a mesentery between the liver and stomach. The greater omentum, a mesentery between the stomach and transverse colon. The greater omentum hangs down over the intestines like an apron. Adipose tissue and lymph nodes lie between its layers. The adipose tissue may prevent heat loss across the abdominal wall. So I hope you can appreciate that the greater omentum is not a taut mesentery between the stomach and the transverse colon, but is instead a very floppy omentum that hangs down. That is in contrast to the lesser omentum, which is quite short and is not hanging in any appreciable sense. It is just connecting the liver and the stomach. I hope you remember which one is the lesser omentum. If you do not, I will remind you right now by putting another arrow to it. Okay, and here we have a picture that is summarizing the mesenteries and the omentums. All right, moving on to